hung low in the sky, casting a soft, silver glow across the forest. The wind whispered through the leaves, the rustling of branches like the gentle sighs of nature herself. Emma had always loved the forest at night. There was something about it, something comforting. The way the world seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if the forest itself were a secret waiting to be discovered. She wasn't lost. Not exactly. At least, she told herself that. It had been a peaceful walk, just a short venture to clear her mind. But now, with the path gone from beneath her feet, the forest had wrapped itself around her, and she was unsure which direction she had come from. The trees seemed taller now, their trunks thick and imposing, like silent sentinels keeping her from the way out. The air was cooler now, tinged with the scent of moss and damp earth. Emma's heartbeat quickened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to remind herself that there was no need to panic. She had been in this forest 100 times before, her footsteps familiar among the ancient trees. The sky above her, where once the stars had been visible, now hid behind a blanket of clouds. The only light came from the silver slivers of the moon, barely enough to guide her steps. And then, as if it were fate's way of easing her mind, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Noah. He was the kind of person who seemed to glow even in the dimmest light. The way he carried himself, the easy smile that never seemed to leave his face. It was something Emma had always admired. Even now, with her thoughts running wild, his presence had a calming effect on her. The tension in her shoulders melted away just by hearing his voice. "Emma?" he asked, his voice gentle, like the softest of melodies. "What are you doing out here all alone?" She had to laugh, though there was a nervous edge to it. "I wasn't alone until I got lost, apparently." Noah chuckled and took a step closer. The quiet of the forest seemed to deepen around them, making it feel as though they were the only two people in the world. "You always seem to find a way to make everything sound like an adventure," he said, a fondness in his tone. "Even when it's just a walk through the woods." Emma's gaze flickered to the trees around them, a mix of awe and uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know, Noah. It doesn't feel like an adventure tonight. It feels different." He studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing. Different how? She hesitated, unsure how to explain it. "It's like the forest knows something. Like it's waiting for something to happen." Noah's expression softened, and he took her hand in his, a warm, steady presence. "Maybe it's waiting for us to find our way out," he said, his voice reassuring. They walked side by side, their steps almost in sync, as if the forest were guiding them together. But as they ventured deeper into the woods, a strange feeling began to grow. The trees felt closer now, pressing in from all sides. The path that had seemed so familiar earlier had vanished entirely, leaving them with nothing but the darkness and the weight of their own thoughts. "Do you hear that?" Emma asked, stopping abruptly. Noah turned to her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" She strained her ears. At first, she heard nothing. Just the soft rustle of the wind, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But then, faint and distant, there was a sound, a soft, melodic hum, like a lullaby drifting through the air. It wasn't real, she told herself. It couldn't be. Yet the more she listened, the clearer it became. The melody was calming, hypnotic even, and as it grew louder, she felt a pull, a gentle tug toward the source of the sound. Noah's grip tightened on her hand. Emma, I don't think we should follow that. But there was something in the air, a quiet tugging at her heart. The forest, so vast and unknowable, had a secret it was offering, a promise of something beyond. She looked into Noah's eyes, and for the first time, she felt the weight of their shared history, of the unspoken things between them. I think I need to, she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the stillness. Noah hesitated, then nodded. Okay. But we stay together, no matter what. They moved toward the sound, each step taking them deeper into the forest's embrace. The moon seemed to shine brighter now, its glow cutting through the trees in ethereal beams. The melody swelled, guiding them, until they reached a clearing, a place Emma had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any other. Its bark shimmered with silver light, its branches weaving together in intricate patterns that seemed to defy logic. The hum grew louder, almost like a voice, calling to them. Oh, the locomotive drawn itself to a stop. Noah took a step back, his face pale. Emma, this isn't right. But Emma felt a peace settle over her, an overwhelming sense of calm that washed away the fear she had carried. The tree was inviting them, offering something she couldn't name but knew with every fiber of her being that it was important. But what was important? She hadn't said a word. She turned to Noah, her heart racing. Do you feel it? The connection? It's like we're supposed to be here. His expression softened, and for a moment there was no fear in his eyes, only wonder. Slowly, almost as though in a trance, he stepped closer, his hand slipping into hers. Together they stood before the tree, the hum now a soft, gentle lullaby that seemed to pull them toward something beyond. The world around them seemed to quiet even further, as if the very forest had decided to hold its breath. The gentle hum of the tree seemed to resonate deep within Emma, vibrating in the very core of her being. It was as though the tree wasn't just calling to her. It was speaking to something far older, far more ancient, within her soul. She could feel Noah's presence beside her, warm and steady, grounding her even as the strange energy of the place seemed to pull at her, urging her to move closer. Noah's grip on her hand tightened, and she turned to him, her breath shallow. His face was still pale, but his eyes, those eyes, seemed lost in the glow of the tree. They were filled with wonder, tinged with a slight fear that she couldn't quite place. I don't know about this, Emma, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. This place, it feels too real, too alive. But Emma couldn't tear her gaze away from the tree. The light it emitted was soft, yet powerful, beckoning them forward. It felt like a story, a dream, that they were walking into. And in this dream, there was only one path. With a quiet breath, she stepped closer, her feet moving almost of their own accord. The closer she got, the stronger the pull became. Her heart raced, her pulse quickened, and the world around her began to blur, like the edges of a painting melting together. The tree stood before her now, its bark glowing softly under her touch as her fingers brushed against it. The hum grew louder, vibrating through her entire body. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her, the calming pulse like a lullaby only the forest could sing. Noah was still standing a few paces behind, watching her with a mix of awe and concern. His voice came to her in a murmur, as though he wasn't sure if it was okay to speak. "Emma, do you feel that? Something's changing. The air's thick with it." She opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. The tree was shifting before her, its branches stretching like fingers into the sky, twisting as if it were alive, its roots shifting beneath the earth as though it were preparing to move. And in the stillness of the forest, the sound of something ancient, something deep, seemed to reverberate through the ground beneath their feet. Emma's heart pounded, but she didn't move away. She felt tethered to the tree in a way she couldn't explain. The forest, the earth, the very air seemed to wrap itself around them, drawing them into a quiet embrace. She glanced back at Noah, whose expression was a mixture of awe and uncertainty, but something in her told her to stay, to keep moving forward. "We're here for a reason," she whispered, almost to herself, though Noah heard her. "I know we are." He didn't reply, but the silence between them stretched longer. Then, with a breath that seemed to fill every inch of the clearing, Noah stepped forward. His hand reached out, hovering near hers, unsure but drawn. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for an answer, something to anchor him to this strange place that neither of them understood. Without a word, Emma placed her hand beside his on the bark of the tree. The moment they made contact, something jolted through her, like an electric pulse racing up her arm and into her chest. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, and the air thickened, wrapping around them in a warm, comforting embrace. And then the hum changed. It deepened, became richer, like a heartbeat that pulsed in the very marrow of their bones. The air shimmered with a golden light, and the world seemed to blur, as if reality itself was slipping away, leaving only the two of them standing before the ancient tree. The whispering sound of leaves in the distance no longer felt like wind, but voices, soft and distant, as if carried on the breeze of a forgotten time. And the glow of the tree seemed to pulse in time with the voices, a rhythm that felt like it had been waiting for centuries. Noah's voice broke through the stillness, almost a whisper. "Emma, what is this? What are we—" Before he could finish, the ground beneath their feet gave way, just for a moment, like a soft tremor, and then an overwhelming sensation of weightlessness. Emma felt herself being pulled forward, but not with fear. No, this was something different. It was as though the forest was inviting her to move, to follow the path it had set before them, to trust in the strange comfort that it offered. She looked at Noah, her eyes wide with an unspoken understanding that neither of them had a choice now. They had come to the heart of the forest, and it was calling them deeper into its mysteries. The air grew warmer now, the golden light swirling around them like a living thing. Emma's heart raced, but there was no fear, only an unshakable certainty. Whatever was happening, whatever was pulling them deeper, was meant to be. They had stepped into the unknown, but together they were no longer just wanderers in the forest. They were something more, something connected to the very pulse of the earth beneath their feet. And as the world around them began to shift and change, they walked deeper into the unknown, side by side, ready to discover what the forest had in store for them. The golden light grew brighter, swirling around them in a mesmerizing dance. Emma felt the warmth, a soft heat that seemed to radiate from the very ground beneath her, as though the earth itself was alive, breathing alongside her. The air was thick with the scent of moss and earth, but there was something else, something fresh, like the smell of new beginnings. Her pulse quickened, but with each breath, the unease from earlier seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of wonder, like she was part of something much larger than herself. Noah walked beside her, his hand still lightly resting on hers. The silence between them had shifted from tension to something deeper, an unspoken connection that neither of them had expected, but which felt inevitable now. His face was etched with curiosity, his brow furrowed in concentration, but there was something else in his eyes too, a tenderness.
"You feel it too, don't you?"
Emma whispered, her voice barely a breath as they continued moving forward. The ground underfoot was soft, almost sponge-like, and they walked in perfect harmony, as if the forest itself was guiding them. Noah nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Yeah," he said softly, "it's like we're being pulled somewhere. But it's not scary. It's like we're supposed to be here." The trees that surrounded them now seemed to lean in closer, their trunks shimmering with a soft, silvery glow. Each leaf, each branch seemed to pulse with life. The further they ventured, the more the forest began to change. No longer was it just a forest. The very landscape itself seemed to be shifting, as though they had crossed into another world entirely. In the distance, through a small break in the trees, a glow appeared, a soft, ethereal light that flickered like a distant star. Emma's heart skipped a beat, her instincts telling her that whatever lay ahead was the heart of this strange journey they had found themselves on. She couldn't explain why, but she felt a sense of inevitability, a knowledge deep inside her that they were nearing the end of something, or the beginning of something entirely new. "Do you think we're meant to find something?" Noah asked, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "Is that why we're here?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the cool bark of the glowing trees. There was no answer, not one she could put into words, but she felt it, deep in her chest, in the pit of her stomach. It was as if the forest had been waiting for them, for this moment, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had experienced, every turn, every step, had led them here, to this exact place. Without speaking, they moved toward the light. The closer they got, the more intense the glow became, until it felt like they were standing at the threshold of something ancient and powerful. The air hummed with a new energy now, a vibrant, almost electric pulse that seemed to resonate in time with their own heartbeats. Emma could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as they reached the source of the light. And then, before them, the forest opened up into a vast clearing. At its center was a pool of water, its surface still as glass, reflecting the moon and the shimmering trees above. But the water was not ordinary. No, it was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. It glowed with a soft, radiant light, casting ripples of colors that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. The edges of the pool were lined with flowers that seemed to bloom and fade before her eyes, their petals glowing faintly in the light. Emma's breath caught in her throat. There was something otherworldly about this place, something that felt both familiar and strange. She could feel the pull of the water, as though it were calling to her. Noah stepped forward, his eyes wide.
"It's beautiful,"
he whispered. His voice seemed to reverberate in the air, blending with the hum of the forest, the whisper of the wind. "But what is it? What are we supposed to do?" Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she looked at the pool, the colors swirling like a living thing. She had the sudden, overwhelming urge to touch it, to dip her fingers into its surface, and yet something told her that doing so would be a decision of great consequence. Maybe we're meant to enter it," Emma said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "It feels like it's waiting for us, like we have to take the next step." Noah hesitated, his gaze shifting between her and the pool. His hand tightened around hers, his grip reassuring, but his eyes were uncertain. "Are you sure? We don't even know what this is, what will happen if we—" "I don't know," Emma interrupted, her voice soft but determined. "But I can't ignore it. I think we're meant to trust it, to trust this moment." The stillness around them was almost deafening, the weight of their decision hanging between them. Time seemed to stretch, as though the world itself was waiting for them to move, to make the choice that would shape whatever came next. Time essayed to, and then, as if the forest itself had heard her thoughts, the water began to ripple gently. The light from the pool grew brighter, pulsing in waves that seemed to reach out toward them, like a hand waiting to be held. Without looking back, Emma took a slow step forward. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the uncertainty, the unknown, but also of the undeniable connection to the place, to the journey, to Noah. She could feel his presence beside her, steady, unwavering, even as he walked into the unknown with her. Together they stepped toward the water. The moment their feet crossed the threshold of the clearing, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the forest reached a crescendo, the air thick with anticipation. And then, as their fingers brushed the surface of the glowing water, everything went still. It was a moment of profound silence. like the entire forest had exhaled in unison. As their fingers touched the surface of the glowing water, an electric pulse rippled through the air, vibrating through Emma's bones. The cool liquid felt soft, almost like liquid light, yet solid in its own way. She could sense something ancient within it, as though the water held centuries of memories, stories waiting to be uncovered. A strange warmth radiated up her arm as she slowly immersed her hand deeper, and with each inch, the world around them seemed to change. The forest, the trees, the moonlit sky, the air began to blur as if it was slipping away into another reality. The colors of the world bled into one another, the hues of green, gold, and silver intertwining, melding into a kaleidoscope of light. Emma blinked, her vision swimming, and for a heartbeat she felt weightless, as though the earth itself had let go of her. Noah's hand slipped into the water beside hers. His fingers brushed against hers, and it was as though a spark had ignited between them, a flash of understanding, a moment of clarity. His touch was steady, warm, and together they felt a deep, profound connection. As they both stood there, the water began to shimmer with greater intensity, swirling in patterns that seemed to dance to an ancient rhythm. The surface of the pool became like a mirror, but not of the present. No, this was something else. It reflected the past, the forgotten moments, and beyond that, something far more mysterious. Images flickered across the surface like whispers of a time long gone. At first it was nothing more than flashes. A family gathered around a fire. A child laughing as they ran through the forest. An old man with eyes full of wisdom gazing at the sky. Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she watched, her breath shallow, the images familiar yet distant. Were these memories? Her memories? Or were they from someone else entirely? She couldn't tell. But then the images began to shift. Noah's voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. Emma. What is happening? What is this? She didn't have an answer, but something in the depth of the water seemed to beckon her closer, as if it were waiting for her to unlock its secrets. Her fingers tingled, and she leaned forward, drawn into the visions that danced before her. Faces in the water grew clearer, and she realized that they were familiar. Not the faces she had seen before, but faces that felt connected to her, intertwined with the fabric of her own life. She saw a woman with dark hair, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow, standing near a tall, shimmering tree. Beside her stood a man, his features sharp yet soft with affection, and a young girl, laughing as she twirled around them. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The woman, the man, they were so real, so vivid, yet she had no recollection of ever meeting them. But as her gaze lingered, something clicked in her mind. That woman. There was something about her that felt so familiar. The way she looked at the child, the love that radiated from her. Who are they? She whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. Noah's eyes were wide with wonder and fear as he looked at the pool. I don't know, but they look like you. Emma swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. The faces in the water were becoming clearer now, their eyes meeting hers as if they were looking directly at her. She felt their presence, the pull of their energy, like a thread woven through time itself. Ah, and then a name echoed in her mind, soft at first, like a whisper. Serene. The name rang through her, clear and undeniable, and Emma gasped as her fingers trembled against the surface of the water.
Selene,
She whispered, unsure of where the name had come from, but feeling it in her heart as if it had always been there. The moment she spoke the name, the faces in the water shifted again, this time growing even more vibrant, more present. The woman's face, Selene, smiled at her, a look of recognition, as though they had shared a bond that spanned lifetimes.
Selene,
Emma whispered again, her heart racing. Is this my past, my life? The pool rippled, and the vision shifted once more. Now she saw a scene unfolding before her. The same woman, Selene, standing at the edge of a forest, looking out over a vast valley, her hand resting on the shoulder of the man beside her. They were gazing at something in the distance, something Emma couldn't see yet, but she felt its importance. And then the water rippled again, as if it were about to show something else, something more. Noah stepped closer, his voice barely a breath. Emma? What's happening? Who is she? Emma shook her head, her mind spinning with the overwhelming flood of images. She wanted to reach out, to understand it all, but it was too much, too fast. There was something she was supposed to remember, something important, but it slipped away just as quickly as it had come. But then, the water grew still, the image of Selene's face faded, and a sense of peace washed over Emma. The confusion, the whirlwind of visions quieted. The pool was once again a mirror, only now it reflected them. Emma and Noah, standing side by side, their hands still resting gently in the water. A soft, soothing voice filled the air, a voice that seemed to come from the very trees around them, the wind, the earth. It was not spoken aloud but felt in their hearts, a presence beyond words. "Master Wish!" cried Master Wish, with no characteristic imitation of a human voice. "Master Wish!" "You are not lost," the voice whispered, like a soft lullaby carried on the breeze. "You are part of the story, part of the circle. Trust what you have found here. Trust each other, for the journey is not over. It has only just begun." The words hung in the air, echoing around them. A promise, a reassurance. The forest, the water, the visions, they had all led them here, to this moment. And though the path ahead was still shrouded in mystery, Emma could feel a certainty now, a deep understanding that this was where they were meant to be, together. Noah's hand tightened around hers, his grip solid and warm. He turned to her, his eyes filled with something that mirrored her own realization. "We're connected to this place, to this journey. Whatever comes next, we face it together, Emma." She nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotions, gratitude, love, and something deeper, something timeless. There was no fear now, only the understanding that they had stepped into something bigger than themselves, and whatever the forest had in store for them, they would face it side by side. Together, they turned their gaze back to the water, to the shimmering pool that had opened a door into the past, and perhaps into the future as well. The shimmering water reflected the soft glow of the moon, casting an ethereal light on their faces. The forest around them was alive, but in a way that felt timeless, as though they had stumbled into a place where moments didn't pass, but rather lingered like memories. There was an undeniable sense of belonging here, a quiet certainty that the forest, the pool, the ancient voices, they were all part of a greater tapestry, a story that spanned centuries and yet was always unfolding. Emma looked at Noah, her heart heavy with emotions she couldn't name. It felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet, yet she wasn't afraid. If anything, there was comfort in knowing they were not alone in this strange, mysterious journey. The forest seemed to pulse with life around them, as if it were aware of their presence, aware of the connection they had discovered. Noah was silent for a moment, his gaze never leaving the water. Then softly he spoke. "Emma, I don't know what we're supposed to do now. I don't know what any of this means, but I feel it too. I feel that it's not just a coincidence that we're here. This, whatever this is, it's meant for us." She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. It was the same feeling she had. A pull, something deeper than mere curiosity. There was a reason they had come to this place, a reason the forest had called them. She could feel it in every breath she took, in the quiet hum of the trees, in the way the ground seemed to welcome their footsteps. As the moments passed, the air around them grew heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The water rippled gently, and with it the soft murmurs of the ancient voices returned. But now they were different. They weren't distant whispers. They were closer, as though the voices were speaking directly to them, and yet they could not quite understand the words. It was as if the language of the forest was one beyond words, one that needed to be felt, not heard. Emma's fingers brushed against the water again, feeling its cool, smooth surface. The moment she made contact, the water began to shift, swirling like a vortex of light, pulling her in. But there was no fear. She could sense that this was not danger. It was an invitation. The water seemed to call to her, urging her forward, asking her to step into it. Noah reached out, his hand wrapping around hers, his grip tight, anchoring her as the water began to shimmer and glow even brighter. His voice was low, filled with wonder and uncertainty. "Emma, are you sure? What do you think will happen if we—" "I don't know," she replied, her voice soft, but filled with a deep sense of peace. "But I feel like this is where we're supposed to be. Like everything that's happened, all the twists and turns, they brought us here for a reason." The water continued to ripple around their hands, the swirling colors intensifying. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the surface of the pool began to change. The images from before, the faces, the figures, returned, this time more vivid, more real. They were no longer fleeting glimpses, but clear, unfolding visions. The faces of the people from the past were now staring back at her, their eyes filled with emotion, longing, love, and even pain. She could feel their presence now, not as distant figures, but as if they were here with her, standing beside her in the clearing. And in the center of the swirling light, one image stood out. Celine. The woman Emma had seen before, but now she was different. Her eyes locked with Emma's, and for a moment it felt as though they were one, like Emma was looking into her own soul, a reflection of herself from a distant time. Celine's lips moved, but no sound came from her, only the soft whisper of a breeze. Emma could feel her emotions, her hopes, her regrets, her love. And suddenly, the memories that had been eluding her began to flood back. The realization hit her like a wave. Celine was not just some distant figure. She was a part of Emma's own history, part of her past, her ancestors. It was as though Emma was staring into the eyes of a woman who had walked the same path she was now walking, the same path of discovery, of love, of loss. Emma had never known her, never heard her name before this moment, but